My name is Anthony Vaccaro, and I'm the president of the Northern Miner Group, which includes the media brands The Northern Miner, of course, but also mining.com and Canadian Mining Journal. It's an honor to be asked back for the second edition of the LIAMforum, since this platform is doing so much to further the conversation around inspiring the next generation of mining talent to take this industry and indeed society at large further down the road of sustainability. I'm here to introduce the keynote presentation for the day entitled The Power of Purpose. It's a presentation that beckons not only the industry itself, but perhaps more importantly, the individuals within it, to wholeheartedly embrace and amplify what truly defines our humanity, and that is our personal purpose. In a world characterized by profound uncertainty, where transformative shifts are not merely desirable, but in fact existential for the mining sector, we're faced with very large challenges, and it's clear that the path to change is a demanding one. It's going to require patience, understanding, collaboration, qualities that sometimes feel like they're in short supply in the modern world. Yet the only way this transformation will be realized is through the collective belief of society and the people in our sector, and the profound good that this industry can contribute to the world. The Power of Purpose, the presentation you're about to see, is a resounding call to action, imploring those within the industry to share their personal narratives, becoming advocates not only for themselves, but also for the crucial work that they undertake, and in doing so, safeguarding the industry's future as it undergoes these profound changes. Our keynote speaker will speak to the significance of the movement and shed light on the transformative potential that it holds for the mining sector and indeed for society as a whole. Who is the speaker, you might ask? It is none other than George Hemingway. Hello, George. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Anthony. Thank you for, again, introducing me, and thank you to the LIAMforum for having us back.
Fantastic. Yes, I was honored to do this with George last year. He gave his usual incredibly inspiring and powerful presentation. Let me quickly introduce George to all of you who don't already know him. He serves as the managing partner at Stratalis, where he advises leaders of companies, organizations, and even countries on the future of how to transform in the most uncertain of times. Through his work, he's collaborated with the world's leading mining companies to set their future visions and design technology roadmaps to reimagine what is possible from industrial enterprises, focusing on the most challenging of areas such as carbon reductions, tailings dams, underground safety, and the mine of the future. He's considered one of the leading futurists that our sector has. He's delivered over 100 keynotes on uncertainty, innovation, and the future of mining, including the World Mining. He's won awards. He's delivered these presentations for the World Mining Congress, SME, S&P Global, NASA, and the Pentagon, and at leading universities and organizations. He's a published author and columnist on the future of the industry and disruption. He's been named top 10 leader in mining in mining technology. And as for those awards, he's won the Robert E. Murray Innovation Award from SME, and he's won 2 Mining Journal Innovation Awards. George, over to you and the Power of Purpose. We look forward to it.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction and the kind invitation to speak today. It's great to be here again at the LIAMforum. It's absolutely good to see friends old and new, and I want to thank you all for taking the time to participate in this important event. It's powerful. So today, I want to share with you the power of purpose. And I'm going to start with a seemingly simple question. Why are you here today? Are you here because you have to be, or are you here because you want to be? And if no one was watching, would you still be here? It's an interesting question. Why? We often talk about what we do when we meet someone. We say, well, I'm an accountant, or I'm a professional cat juggler. But rarely do we share the why behind our what. Yet why is at the core of our DNA. It's deeply personal and remarkably difficult for most people to share, yet doing so is critical. Today, I'm going to talk to you about our role in helping the mining industry to transform in the most uncertain of times, and how discovering and sharing our own personal quest for meaning could mean the difference in the mining industry's quest to transform. As Anthony mentioned, I spend a lot of time helping some of the world's largest industrials to set their vision and their strategy and their roadmaps around some of the largest showstoppers, especially in the mining industry, and figure out how to do so while maintaining trust. And yet, like so many after the last couple of years, I find myself in a bit of a career crisis. I've spent the last 20 years becoming an expert in uncertainty. In the last couple of years, everyone seems to think they've caught up with me. And there's a reason why. I mean, look at our world. We've got global debt and inflation. We've got people resigning all over the place, made only more difficult by the fact that no one wants to get out of their pajamas and come to work. We've got climate events. What a nutty year. And of course, war. What can you rely on, really? Our friends are our enemies, and our enemies are our friends, and then there are enemies again. And I guess the only thing that really takes comfort for me is to see just how resilient we are as a society and as human beings. We still argue about normal stuff. Politics, whether we are and aren't in a recession, whether a loaf of bread's going to be $115 or $150 next year. How do we convince people to get out of their pajamas and come back to work? Our work at Stratalis has shown that in the times of greatest uncertainty, human beings react in, well, the most predictable of ways. About 50% of us gravitate to something that gives us comfort, a family, a tradition, religion. The other half tend to rise up and rally and take controls in different ways, to fight against some kind of injustice, for example. Nowadays, business and wealth have reemerged as popular targets. And we've seen that come into play in the last, well, decade, but especially in the last couple of years. And it's going to impact business and mining in a very, very big way. Now, a great example of this, one of my favorites, in fact, is aviation. The aviation industry has had a rough couple of years. It started, let's look at Boeing, for example. It started with the 737 MAX crashing out of the sky. And then COVID hit and we realized we didn't have to fly as much, which is just fine because the industry came under fire for being a huge producer of GHGs, which isn't helped by the fact that billionaires, which are kind of the enemy of the state right now, taking joyrides into the stratosphere. Curiously enough, as it's getting better for them financially now, after COVID, it seems to be getting worse and worse for us, if that's even possible. More cancellations, less staff. Not that I'm pointing fingers at anyone who sucks or anything, but even people attacking flight attendants. It's ugly. And what's going on over here is that people are angry, and it doesn't work out in any direction for the aviation industry. You see, if they make money, we hate them because they make money and suck at the same time. And if they lose money, well, there aren't that many of them left over for us to complain about. Now, it's all seemingly disconnected, but here's the thing. Aviation, like mining, is a mature industry. And like mining, it knows it needs to transform. And like mining, it knows it's under pressure. But people inside are resisting. They're clinging to the past, and it's all going to add up for problems down the line. What is certain is one thing. Society isn't happy. Deep down, people are more uncertain about the future than they've ever been, and for many of them, something is missing. For the last few years, we've had enough craziness. The societal energy has been directed somewhere else. But the world is still looking for answers or scapegoats, and eventually it will find them. And big businesses like aviation, like pharmaceuticals, like technology, like natural resources are still very much in the crosshairs. So what do you do in a world in which everything can be seen? And anything that can be seen can be canceled. Now look, in fairness, some industry had it a little rougher than others the last couple of years. You remember when Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram were knocked off for like 6 hours and everyone to Twitter and saying, oh my God, Facebook and Instagram are down. Well, more importantly, the next day, a whistleblower went in front of Congress and said that Facebook is damaging society, it's endangering democracy, and it's ruining our children. Maybe it's better, some said, that it stays offline. And of course, it didn't. But folks did try and are trying to cancel things like Facebook. And they're doing that because, well, we don't trust them. And frankly, they know it. So they went ahead and they canceled themselves. Hello, Meta. Not that that helped at all, because this year, recently, Facebook was fined $1 billion by the Europeans for, well, being Facebook. And no amount of Mark Zuckerberg trying to convince us that our disembodied selves belong in the metaverse, or changing names, or distract us by being in jujitsu blood tournaments to show us what a real man he is, can change the fact that the loss of trust matters. It started with Cambridge Analytica, and a lot of things have continued it. But Europe is basically saying, oh, we don't like you, but as long as you're here, we're going to take your money. If they can do it to the world's biggest technology companies, absolutely no one is immune. And if you're in an industry where players are under attack, you can just sit back, and you can watch, and you can hope that it passes you by and that you get lucky, but you won't. Last year, it was Facebook. This week, it's Amazon. Were they ready? We'll see. How about Twitter? Remember Elon Musk? Sure you do. Darling of the world, darling of green tech, darling of the mining industry. He was going to invest in batteries and mines and make us cool and important again. But no, even he, for all his supposed brilliance, just took a page out of the Facebook playbook. Launch something zany, change your name, cage fight to the death. It's not just tech. You've got a problem, bud. Bud Light, I mean. Bud Light made the egregious, unforgivable, seemingly monumental error of sending a case of its fine product to a transgender influencer. Seen and canceled. And the price of this loss of trust? Bud Light sales are down 30% this year. They're no longer the #1 beer brand in America. They've lost $400 million. You want a price on the loss of trust? How does $400 million, for starters, sound? It's so bad that at some point you could get a 1995 case of Bud Light for free with a $20 coupon, except, of course, in Canada. Now, you could cancel Facebook, and you could cancel Amazon, and you could cancel Twitter, and you could cancel Bud Light, but can you cancel mining? I'm going to agree with the groupthink here and say, no, you can't cancel mining. Not yet, at least. But you can cancel miners, and you can make it a pretty unpleasant and expensive place to make money. As with the mining industry, Facebook and Twitter and all these guys had a lot protecting them. But hidden in everything that's going on with Facebook is partially the question, do we hate Facebook? Or do we just hate the ugliness that is the internet right now? Does society hate mining companies, or do they just hate coal companies? Or do they just hate really one bad actor? If you're Facebook, you don't get the luxury of ignoring what's going on with the rest of the industry. Nor does Amazon, nor does Twitter. And if you're a well-acting, upstanding gold company, you don't get the luxury of ignoring the reputation of, say, a coal company. It's kind of tough because you've got to make sure that the rising tide carries all ships, because broader society can't tell the difference between you and everybody else. It doesn't help. There really isn't a single mining industry. The only real connection is taking stuff out of the ground and the fact that we're all lumped together by society. As such, it's very hard for the industry to speak with a single voice, and even harder to do so to build trust as a single unit, especially because the strategy, and it's the right strategy necessarily for any one company, is to differentiate yourself by drawing a thin green line between you and the person to your left. So you see, any one mining company faces the potential for a Facebook problem. And the Facebook problem is the reason why we're seeing the creation, say, of Vale energy transition metals, or Tech trying to split in two, or not, Glencore. But anyway, goodbye iron ore, goodbye coal, and hello something that everyone can get behind, or at least not in front of. Now, I've been saying for a decade, the industry needs to move from mining to the benefits of materials. And here it is. As Rio puts it, we're not mining or metals or minerals. We're not even batteries. We're materials that matter. And that's cool. But what's the point of all this? The mining industry needs to transform and grow, and it's going to get harder and harder to obtain the licenses and the social license and the regulatory permission to enter into new businesses or get new mining licenses, for example, if you have a trust issue. The industry is trying to build a quilt to protect itself, not one based on love, but based on batteries. They are trying to make themselves relevant, and the messaging is on point. But there's only so much rebranding and logos and fancy initiatives can do, and there's only so long you can hold out without advocates. As the CEO of Shell found out, trying to insert yourself into a conversation with messaging doesn't always go to plan, which is why they've been disinvited from several climate conferences over the last couple of years, and why this happened at their annual general meeting. Now, that chairperson in the middle, wondering what the heck is going on, that's Andy McKenzie, the former CEO of BHP, who is now wondering why he didn't go into something less controversial, like beer. But mining is at the forefront of supplying the commodities the world is going to need to get more of in order to transform and to move to a GHG neutral world. At the same time, the population is continuing to grow, and that's going to need a lot of metals and a lot of minerals, and they're going to come at us fast. And here's the rub. The industry won't be able to transform as quickly as demand is going to rise, and it's going to have to make some hard choices. All these folks here are going to have to make hard choices between upping production, reducing CapEx, and meeting profitability targets and transforming at the same time. And even with a ton of help, it's going to struggle to do all three in the time horizon it has set for itself. If society doesn't trust the industry or believe in its purpose or recognize how interconnected it is to global success, it risks being derailed. And unlike Facebook and mining, there really isn't a Twitter to go to when things go wrong. The key to all this is trust. Trust is the new competitive advantage. A few years ago, Stratalis came out with a study called the CEO's Agenda. And we went ahead and we talked to a bunch of CEOs and we asked them to list what were the most critical uncertainties and critical challenges they needed to address to succeed. The number one thing we heard is that trust is the most important. That it's the new competitive advantage for mining companies, and that the rules of the game, what investors, what employees, what regulators, what politicians, what society expect have changed. And I think that message matters more now even than it did a few years ago. Because you see, the big showstoppers that are going to impact trust will always hit us by surprise. And they keep changing, right? People as a whole, for example, tend to underestimate how quickly any one technology will be mature. And they tend to overestimate how long it takes for that thing to be implemented, which is why we've been talking about electric vehicles for decades. But boom, overnight, here they are. Now, 10 years ago in mining, the buzz was around mechanization and automation and AI, and that labor would protest and about losing their jobs. And that hasn't happened yet. We underestimated. But now it's here, and now it's coming. Just like the writers in Hollywood. We're mechanizing. We're automating. And as for everyone in this room who here was worried about ChatGPT last year, now you might say, it's not going to impact me. But consider this. The last 30 seconds of this speech was written not by me, but by ChatGPT. Could you tell? And now that you know, do you care? So while people are looking at the obvious stuff, automation, jobs, ChatGPT, boom, a tailings dam, or 2, or 3 falls. What is clear is that without an enhancement of trust, something, and we don't know what it is yet, some trigger, because it's usually something unexpected, could eventually take down a mining company. When that happens, not if, but when, what is your buffer zone? Whatever currency of trust you've built. You have to build a warm, comfy trust quilt around you and your company and your industry. And I don't know if you've noticed, batteries aren't that warm. Now, for some mining companies, we appear to have entered a golden era of trust. You could argue that that part of the mining industry over there has just dodged a bullet. We're suddenly critical. We're suddenly strategic. Why, suddenly, we're like banking in the United States. Too big, too important to fail. The scales are tipping in our favor. But here's the thing, society no more trusts mining in 2023 than it did in 2020. But China is scarier, politics make strange bedfellows, and we all want the latest iPhone, which is just like the last iPhone and just like the one before it. So the benefits that mining brings outweigh the trust deficit. But you can't rely on that. What if we're not so critical anymore? What if the scales tip the other way? Now, the industry as a whole, especially the largest miners, aren't just sitting back and waiting for fate to wash over them. They're out there saying the right thing, addressing the showstoppers. But the challenge here is that good messaging and advertising, even if they're unified and powerful, are just one key part of the story, and one that works better with regulators and governments and even recruiting. But it's not going to move the needle quickly enough when it comes to trust. You need something else for that. People don't trust industry bodies and corporations to tell them the truth. Even if they believe you, it doesn't resonate in a way that's authentic and matters. That is going to take a different kind of message. Now, the obvious answer to this is to look at companies that have done this well. The popular versions of this is Apple and Tesla, for example. They've made something that was on the verge of being commoditized almost seem interesting and virtuous, as if they're doing something better for humanity and insulating their brands at the same time. And these are two companies and industries, ironically, that are desperate for the metals that mining provides. But what they've done and tried their best to do, and I think succeeded, is draw a thin green line between themselves, their rockets, their solar panels, their phones, their batteries, and the mining industry. They're the good guys, even with this guy not helping so much. So much so that Apple went and invented a new kind of aluminum, just to make sure that we knew they could. Now, it's just branding, but the average person can't tell the difference. One of the reasons why this works for Apple and Tesla is that their purpose appeals to you and I on a deeply human level. And when it works because they don't advocate for themselves, you do. There is no greater advocate for these brands than the general public. Some things just don't feel authentic. American poutine, gas station sushi, companies telling you to trust them. There's a challenge here, and this gets to the heart of it. If you want to build trust, you need to connect on a deeply personal level. And there's no way that the industry as a whole is going to speak with a single voice. Anyway, that's not how authenticity is really born. Purpose and trust doesn't come from a company or an industry. It comes from your heart. Look, mining is way more important than cars or cell phones. It's almost a basic building block of everything that matters. It's like farming or your health. If you're a farmer, you don't just grow corn. You feed the world. If you're in healthcare or pharmaceuticals, you don't just peddle drugs, you heal. And everybody in that industry gets that. They get this halo. It's a purpose that extends to everyone that works in healthcare, from the farmer to the person in accounting who works behind the scenes, from the nurse to the person in procurement who makes sure there are syringes. That's something people genuinely carry with them when they go to work. They understand the importance not of what they do, but why they do it. And they understand why it is important to others. We understand why what they do is important. So ironically, the place we need to look in mining isn't outside of mining, but inside, at what was, and possibly is, one of the greatest eroders of trust and uncertainty in the mining industry. Tailings. Last few years, Stratalis has done a lot of work in some of the trickier parts of the geotechnical world for mining companies. So slope stability, underground seismicity, tailings, and these folks who essentially are protecting others, if you speak to them, you notice something different than you might have, say, in the same big company a decade ago. You find people who are in charge of tailings and big mining companies have passion. They understand that they have a deeper purpose, a knowledge of what they do and why it matters. They have a purpose. They save lives. They prevent failures. They stand guard. These are folks that believe that what they do is more important than the companies they do it for, more important than themselves, more important than results. They have a duty to society, one that I think if push came to shove, they would stand up and fight the tide for, to make sure that the right thing was done, because it matters. Because they matter, because they have purpose, and that purpose, it breeds commitment and it breeds authenticity. And you know what authenticity breeds? It breeds trust. So that person helping to reduce GHGs in mining is saving the world. Person in tailings, guarding a community. Seismicity, preserving an operator's life. But that person in procurement, do they know why they matter to society? Do they have a purpose? How about that person in digital who's building an app to make sure that you know when the scoop shows up at the face? Do they understand how they're changing the world? They couldn't be farther away from breaking a rock. Do they understand how much mining and what they do impacts the world in a better way? Back to where we started today. The last few years have been intense. Climate change has gifted us hurricanes, wildfires, droughts, heat waves, trade wars, and China and debt and housing prices have all hit us in the pocketbook. Our healthcare systems have been brought to the brink by a pandemic, and they'll only continue to be by an aging population. And in response, we, humans, we're all making changes, reprioritizing what is important to us and to our world, and sometimes making drastic modifications along the way. It's almost as if we're having a global midlife crisis. And this is causing a lot of people to take a fresh look at what they do and why they do it and who they work for and who they support or don't. And this is one of the greatest challenges facing all companies, and mining is not immune. Case in point, a 77-year-old man under investigation for a scheme to conceal classified documents, indicted for fraud, election interference, conspiracy, and honestly, I don't even know what else, is running for president of the United States and is, for all intents and purposes, the frontrunner. It only boggles the mind if you don't understand his core ethos. He speaks to the people's why. He is doing what he is doing, and he connects it in a way that matters to others. Like him or not, he is compelling. And he and the people who believe in him weave a powerful quilt woven of purpose against forces that would otherwise topple almost anyone else. But could there be a greater example of the power of a quilt of voices than what is going on today, still in the Ukraine? I remain awed by the very human reasons why the world has rallied to the side of Zelensky, a David to Russia's Goliath, and stayed there. Because you see, Vladimir Putin is a master of messaging. And in a moment reminiscent of the Second World War, he told us he was freeing Ukraine from fascism, from Nazis, protecting Russians from genocide, protecting the will of the people. He had right, and he had God on his side. And when all this started, Zelensky was offered a chance by the West in the face of an unrelenting onslaught, outnumbered, outgunned, to escape, to build a government in exile. And he said no. And here's the thing. This is a man who's clear on his why. He's clear on his purpose. He doesn't need a ride. He needs ammunition. He refuted the powerful single Russian narrative with stories of his own, connecting it to our purpose, that he's protecting not just himself, but us, reminding us why it should matter, and then reminded us he's fighting for all of Europe, because if we do not, you're next. It sounds familiar. The might of the Russian media and diplomatic machine had worked for years for this moment, and America divided, Europe reliant on Russian energy, and on the other side of the ring, a former actor and comedian as mayor of its largest city. The most powerful part of this is not Zelensky's message. Yes, it matters that a president is saying it, but even more powerful are the people sharing their personal stories and purposes. He knows his why. He knows his purpose. And it works because he shares it and he asks others to share theirs. And it works because it comes from a place of authenticity. And it works because he inspires others to do the same. It works because he is weaving a fabric, a quilt of protection in the most uncertain times. And the results? Well, Germany sends weapons, cancels the Nord Stream pipeline, doesn't know where its energy is coming from. We cut off Russia from the banking network and SWIFT. The Swedes, the Finns, the neutral people breaking their neutrality, and the world sends weapons and money and more money and more money. And yet he carries on, sharing his message while we send missiles. Backed into a corner, his narrative in shreds, Putin resorts to nuclear saber rattling. But the world shares something more powerful than a nuclear saber: a shared purpose. And a quilt of countries united to avoid the unthinkable appears ready to act. So how do you fight a Goliath? With a million Davids. The message here for us is very, very clear. The mining industry is facing a wave of change, one in which it is no longer the Goliath, one in which no single message will stem the tide, one in which a million Davids are needed. And like Zelensky, what we do may be less important than why we do it. Your why is the key to transforming the mining industry. So as I started, I would ask you again to genuinely think of the answer to this question. What is my why? Why am I here today? Why do I get up in the morning? Why do I work in mining? More importantly, why does my why matter to the grandmother down the street, or the kids playing in the yard, or the fishermen on the East Coast? There are a lot of whys here, but which one is yours? If you can't find your why, I urge you to keep asking, to keep searching, not just of yourself, but of your friends, your colleagues. Ask them why they do what they do. See if it resonates, and go deeper, not just into what you do, but into how what you do helps others. And then, and this is the key, share it. Because that's how trust is built, by sharing our deeper personal purposes with the world. And it's through these authentic and genuine personal stories that change happens. I challenge you today to find and share your why with each other. Like a comfortable quilt made up of tiny but interconnected pieces, each person's story shared is a thread that ties us together, a fabric that comforts us when times are tough and provides us with protection in a world that is increasingly unwilling to accept the past and increasingly unforgiving and focused on canceling anything that doesn't align with the message of the day. Each why told is a story that makes up these portraits of purpose. And together they will help to increase the trust and reduce the uncertainty that the industry experiences. If you ended up in this industry, in mining, and you stayed, there was a reason. And you do have a connection to the good the industry does, to the benefits you are giving society. So that's the secret. How do you build trust? We, the companies we work for, and the people who make them up, need to focus not just on the obvious, GHG reduction, tailings dams, storytelling, advertising, but in getting our people and ourselves to define and deliver our own personal purposes as advocates for the industry and the world. More than ever, it is clear that it is not what we do, but why we do it that matters. That the smallest voices, unified in a single quilt behind not one message, but many individual messages of purpose, can build the trust quilt that the industry needs to transform in the most uncertain of times. And that is the power of purpose. Thank you.
Thank you to you, George. Fantastic, fantastic presentation. I mean, talk to you about getting right to the heart of the matter and speaking a lot of truth, I think, that this industry needs to hear. I think sometimes we're guilty of maybe being too self-congratulatory and not wide open about the reality of what we're up against in terms of public perception and about how to really affect the kind of change that we want. So thank you. Fantastic. We do have a couple of minutes. If there is any questions from our audience, we have a bit of time here for Q&A. So if there's any questions there, please do just put those up. I don't see any pending right now. I think everyone just needs time to digest it, George. There's a lot there. to go on and think about and really challenge ourselves to do a bit more. George, my question to you, what is your personal why?
Oh, that's an interesting one. So I think my personal why, it's deeply personal. It's really about my family and my daughter in particular. It's all about, the reason why I work in mining, the reason I do what I do, is because I genuinely believe that the industry does good, but that it needs to transform in order to have a future and a world that is successful, that is sustainable, and that is safe. And so I work in this industry to be a part of that transformation. And my why has to be my family.
Fantastic.
And so that's the reason. That's the reason why.
That motivation is propelling you to do much, much good. We've been honored to have George speak at our Northern Miner Symposiums. And after he speaks consistently at every symposium, it's the most talked about presentation of the day. People are always abuzz coming up to me, see executives and people just getting in the industry alike really are moved by what you have to say. What are you seeing, George? You've been a futurist for this industry. We first, I think, met 6-7 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good work then. Can you tell us a few key points? Is your message getting through? What have you seen in your time in the mining industry in terms of evolution on these important fronts?
So I think the message is getting through, and what's fascinating. And I remember sitting with a CEO giving a discussion, a talk like this about 10 years ago. And at the time when I'd had that conversation with the gentleman, he had said, yes, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. But really this year, the market expects us to what was the word for it? To restructure, to resettle, need to make a little bit of money was what he was basically saying. And I said, oh, okay. All right. Well, as a CEO, that's the choice they make. What's fascinating is in the last few years, I've had very similar conversations, again, as you're pointing out, Anthony, around the world when I speak, and the tone is a little bit different. The tone is most certainly that trust matters, that transformation matters, and doing it together is important. And I know that, for example, Mark Cutifani is going to be on later today. And I remember speaking with Mark a few years ago. And what was fascinating, I think, is that this was a guy that got it, understood that for transformation to happen, it wasn't something that could just happen to people, but had to also be done with people, and that there was a price to be paid by the mining companies to transform. And so I think we're seeing more and more of that. I also think we're seeing it in the generations. Frankly, there are younger people and newer minds in the industry. And that's also transforming, I think, the decisions that are being made from the inside out.
Fantastic. Well, and that's the LIAMforum is a key contributor to make sure that we're speaking to those younger voices. We do have a couple of questions, George,
Yep.
so let me get to them because we have a few minutes here.
Please.
The first one comes from a gentleman named Jonathan. He asks, blockchain technology was seen as the new answer for trust and traceability, including us when it comes to things like conflict minerals, ESG scores, quality sourcing. Do you think it is an effective means of building trust in our industry?
It's an interesting question. I think the ability to source where things are coming from and where they're going and how they are having an impact is an important mechanism for trust. And whether that's blockchain or simply basically tagging and tracking in other ways where minerals are coming from and where they're going, they're critical. Now, some of my clients are very focused on circular mining and on being able to get a premium on the London Metals Exchange, or just a premium in terms of being used relative to other commodities. And what's driving the ability to do that? The ability to say that this is low carbon nickel, and it came from here and it went through there and it was processed in this way and it's going here. And when it shows up to your port in wherever, China, this is the footprint that it had. So the short answer is yes, that kind of transparency, much like in tailings, where you're able to also see the rating of any dam, that kind of transparency, that light is what builds trust. It's critical.
And perfect segue to the next question, because it's on trust. John would like to push down a little bit more on, practically speaking, what trust means. He asked, what is the currency of trust? How does mining trade it, bank it, continue to earn it? Is it transparency? Is it equity? As an extractive focused business, what does mining give back to keep this trust?
So wow, that's a whole treatise. So I think the short answer is that everything you've mentioned is part of building trust. But I think part of it as well, as you say, it's a commodity business. It's true. Commodity businesses aren't particularly good at thinking themselves as having customers. So I would end you to stop for a moment and ask yourself, who is your customer? It's not just the people that take the ore or take the metals. But if you look a little bit more broadly at what traditionally might have been called stakeholders, but let's call them customers instead. Ask yourself, what do they want from you and what would be compelling to them? And how can you build value with them in a way that resonates with them? Now, how do you bank that trust? It's kind of like I said, banking trust is it's like branding. Whether you work on having a brand or don't, you've got one. So it's building that goodwill that you have. And it's a sort of thing that, frankly, occurs in all aspects of our lives. If you think of a marriage or a relationship, every relationship goes through some sort of rocky patch and sometimes several. The ones that survive and the ones that don't are often the ones that built up some sort of currency of trust and a shared foundation and a shared set of values and understanding. And that commitment to working together to actually overcoming those challenges. That's essentially what you're looking for as an industry.
Excellent. I think that's a really strong message to end on. So George, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge and your thoughts.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.